What's up, YouTube, and welcome to my pickups video for the month of June 2023. Had kind of an interesting month this month. I did a little bit of travel. I had a work trip to Little Rock, Arkansas, and hit a few game stores around that area there before that I'd been to, but also got to see some different things. And then also went to a con in Bloomington, Normal, Illinois last weekend, the Illinois Game Con, which I've been to a few different years, but this is the first time that it was all the way in June. It's usually a little bit earlier in the year. Outside of that, just found a couple other things online that I'll show you over the month that I went ahead and grabbed. So first thing, it was also something I got locally at a Goodwill, and it was a Xbox 360 wireless controller. You're probably thinking, big deal. But I got thinking, I had never had the wireless version of the controller. Both of my controllers were the old school wired white controllers, and that's what I've been using because honestly the Xbox 360 has never been one of my favorite systems, and I had a really janky white original Xbox 360 that I've been using for years. So this actually ended up leading to other things, because when I went to test this out when I got home, it worked fine with getting the system operating. However, my 360 no longer worked. And so my white 360, it didn't red ring of death, but ultimately it would not read discs anymore. And I found that this is obviously a common problem because the 360 white systems, the original ones, had all kinds of problems, as we all know. So I connected with one of my fellow YouTube friends who happens to be local, which is Tom TB 46667, the Golden Age Gamer. Hopefully you guys subscribe to his channel as well. Great local collector in the St. Louis area, and we're good friends, and so he actually happened to have several spare 360 systems and hooked me up with a 360 Slim system. So now I have the new technology. This is the 250 gig hard drive model, and ultimately I'm liking this quite a bit. My other system was such a joke. I got it used years ago, and it was a system that I guess had been used in like a LAN room or something like that, but they must have been running bootleg games on it because it had been banned from Microsoft on the internet forever, and so I never took that thing online. And so now I have a 360 that can actually go online, has Wi-Fi, all this kind of stuff that I never even had in my other 360. That being said, I did go back and play some 360 games this month, and I still think it's a pretty mixed bag system if for multi-platforms. And then really as far as like system exclusives, it's just I don't like it nowhere near the level that I like the original Xbox, which I am a big fan of. So that being said, now that I have a nice, better 360 that also takes up a smaller footprint and will hopefully be much more reliable, I might get in some new 360 games in the near future if I find some things that somehow I missed along the way. So big thank you to Tom for hooking me up with this, gave me a great friend price on it, and I'm definitely looking forward to using that more in the future. So we'll move into some games I got this month. This was something I picked up on the Arkansas trip that I've actually been wanting quite a bit. I really would have liked to have this complete, but decided since they had it loose in the store, it was worth grabbing. And that is the Invincible Iron Man for Game Boy Advance. Most of you are probably thinking, wow, just some crappy movie license game, who cares? But actually this has got a pretty interesting history behind it. This was a pretty early Game Boy Advance game, and for some reason it's really hard to find. I don't know why the low production run, but it actually preceded any of the Marvel Universe movies that Iron Man was in, so before all the individual movies as well as the Avengers movies, and really was just based on the comic book version of Iron Man. It's actually a pretty decent run and gun, plays very much like a Mega Man style game. I think that was obviously what they were using as their template. And I'm not going to say it's a classic by any means, but it does hold its own, and so I can kind of see like why, even if you're not a huge Iron Man fan, you might be interested in playing this game as well. But very happy to find this. This has actually been a really big thorn in my side. I've been kind of somewhat looking for this for several years now and just never found it out in a store or anything like that, so very happy to grab that for the collection. Move into something I got at the Game Con last weekend. Honestly, there was the biggest crowd I've ever seen at that con. There was more vendors than I've ever seen at that con, but the quantity of merchandise for sale felt like it was way down. Just like the vendors didn't have a lot to sell, and for me, maybe just not as much as I was looking for my personal collection. But definitely some nice stuff there. I like that con in that it pulls from the Chicago, St. Louis, and Indianapolis areas. It seems like it's kind of a central location for all three. So you definitely get to see some different vendors there that I don't see locally at the St. Louis Mo Game Con. But one thing I did grab there was something for my Sega Saturn collection. So if you follow my videos for a long time, I do have a complete US Sega Saturn retail collection. But one thing I was missing was the pack-in version of Virtua Fighter Remix. I have the long box retail version of the game, which is actually the rare version of the game. But for some reason, I never had this jewel case version that was packed in with some of the systems. And then I think there's also like another not-for-retail version or resale version that was also packed in a cardboard sleeve. So I need to track that one down too as well, I guess, for my Sega Saturn collection, but ultimately it's not that critical. Really, I think the story behind this one was they rushed the original Virtua Fighter out on the Saturn. It was pretty weak as far as some of the issues with it. And to make up for that, Sega rushed this remix version with some different features that were more closer to the arcade version. And this is probably the better version to play if you want to play the original Virtua Fighter. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because the Saturn also has a good version of Virtua Fighter 2, which is ultimately the better game in my opinion. So nice to have this regardless. It's just going to be just another filler for my Saturn collection, but just, gets me a little bit closer to having all the variants, I guess. One other stop I made while I was in Arkansas is I visited Conway, Arkansas, which is pretty near the Little Rock area. And there's a store there that I had been to several times over the years called Game Point. But if you are a big YouTube subscriber to the new owner, you would know that it has now been rebranded Retro Rick's Game Point. And as a YouTuber now owns the business. He has made a lot of changes since the last time I was there. It really reflects the kind of stuff that he wants to sell in the store. So there's a lot of like toys and t-shirts and stuff like that. Not necessarily what I'm shopping for, but I guess I can see why it does give the store a new appeal, maybe to some different customers that didn't shop there before. But there is some decent stuff in there, I will say, and one thing I grabbed was for the Super Nintendo is a upgrade to a complete copy of Super Buster Brothers. And this is a series that I've always been a big fan of, also known as Pang. I have an arcade board for an exclusive arcade version called Mighty Pang even. But I do think that this is a great series and always welcome for any console that it lands on. Just great arcade Capcom fun, and then I also thought the box artwork on this was particularly rad of the era for an early 90s game. So very happy to add this to my Super Nintendo collection complete in the box, and it had like all the inserts and stuff in it too, so that was kind of nice to find. And then I'll go ahead and just sell off my cart copy. So that was the only thing I got at that store, and then I'll show you a couple other things gaming related that I got at the con last weekend. This was just a very surprise find. It was kind of like, I don't know much about this. I tried to look it up on my phone, and I didn't see any sales history on it. It may be turbo rare, it may not be a big deal at all, but I thought it was kind of cool. And that is a Tekken 3 pre-order bonus for Best Buy that is a phone card. And it's sealed inside this little card sleeve. So it's not a disc inside here. I know it looks like a disc sleeve, but it's actually a phone card that's rattling around in there somewhere. For those of you who weren't alive to live through the late 90s, phone cards were actually a big deal. If we didn't all have cell phones, and so you would use payphones frequently, and or you would call long distance using a calling card, and you could get a much better deal on a calling card than you could just actually paying phone company rates. So I fondly remember even going away to college during this late 90s era and using phone cards extensively to call home and call other places. But with that came kind of a collectible mania that was short-lived, and that was everyone wanted like their own branded or licensed phone cards with artwork and images and things like that on the cards as well. So ultimately, that's what I think is probably inside here, is just a character artwork or whatever, or Tekken logo on the actual phone card itself. So my understanding is Best Buy did a few other promos like this. I think they had one for Final Fantasy VII and maybe even a couple other games as well. Be kind of cool to track those down, even if I could get some more of these that had the original packaging, because I can't imagine many people would have saved these. Most people would have used the phone card and pitched this a long time ago. So kind of neat. I didn't pay a whole lot for this. Like I said, I can't find any sales history on this, so if this is some massive treasure, I guess I would be willing to sell it on, but for now it'll just live in my PS1 collection, because I think it's kind of cool. So just kind of a different thing that I found there. From that same vendor, they also had some stuff that it wasn't from the vendor because I asked him, but it was all vintage stuff collected from E3 events in the late 90s as well. And I don't know if it was a friend of his or whatever, but they gave him like all their promotional stuff that they'd collected from E3. Pretty interesting to flip through. There were some cool things in there. He was individually pricing it all, so I wasn't going to buy everything. But this was the one thing that really stood out to me, was a original bumper sticker for Panzer Dragoon 2 Zwei on the Sega Saturn. So definitely thought this was very attractive and a cool thing I can add to my Sega Saturn collection. Really like things like this that actually are vintage promotional material versus just all the new stuff that gets reproduced now willy-nilly. So very cool to get this for my Sega Saturn collection, and I think this will display nicely on the shelf with all the other Saturn games. Really wrapping it up, there were only 2 other things I got at the con last weekend, and they were magazines. I always do look for magazines when I go to game cons because I hate shipping them and paying the shipping prices for each individual issue. So this is a great way to get a deal on magazines, and I ultimately found a couple that I was pretty excited about. I like to pick up issues of this particular magazine whenever I can find them. This is Videogame's Ultimate Magazine, and this was kind of a precursor to Tips and Tricks magazine when it was more just about full gaming news and reviews versus just being a Tips and Tricks magazine. But this is one of the later issues when they changed the font on the heading of the magazine, kind of before the magazine died out. I think this one was from 95 or 96? 96. But it's kind of neat because they did also cover arcade games. The writing style on these was a little bit more mature than something like a Game Pro. They also kind of had like a snark to their responses to reader letters, not emails, but actual letters that they would use and things like that. So probably a more of a teenage audience, I guess they were going for. I always thought these were kind of neat. The thing that was kind of strange about this magazine and Tips and Tricks, in my opinion, is they were published by Larry Flint. So while they were pumping out Hustler magazine, they were also doing video game magazines out of the same building, I guess. It's printing facility, whatever it was. But I always thought that was kind of interesting considering that these were targeted to a much younger audience than some of Larry Flint's other publications. But very happy to get this issue. Just a cool cover with Wolverine on the cover with featuring the X-Men Children of the Atom game inside. I think it was based on the arcade game or maybe when it was first coming to the Saturn. So very good issue to read. One thing I do want to mention in here, I think it was this issue, there was a very unusual 3DO game that they talked about in here that was supposed to be coming out. Yes, I just found it. This was a 3DO game that was canceled called Dueling Firemen. And there is some very interesting cameos in this game from indie music artists and kind of like down and out Hollywood actors of the 90s. And if you want, please take a look at the trailer on YouTube for this game because there is some very surreal footage of what this was probably going to turn into. I can see why it got the plug pulled because it probably wasn't going to sell very well, but it definitely would have been a very weird highlight of the 3DO library. So very interesting game. It also stars Rudy Ray Moore, or also known as Dolomite. So you can only imagine what the plot of that one is. But a game that very much is of the 90s, and I enjoyed reading about it in here, and it got me to search out some more information about it, and definitely one that we missed out on for sure. Maybe it'll see the light of day sometime now that some of the footage is out there. And then, so speaking of Tips and Tricks magazine, I also got a Tips and Tricks magazine, and I don't really collect these full on because, again, so much of the content is just like codes and cheap passwords and things like that. But I do like the writing style when they actually did have like sidebar information about Japanese games and arcade games. They did a really nice job on some of their actual writer content. Because many of the writers came from that Video Games Ultimate magazine. But when I saw this issue, this was absolutely a must-buy. I was super excited to find this. I didn't know this issue existed. I'd never seen it before. But this has a Rival Schools cover on it, and I think it is awesome. Rival Schools is one of my all-time favorite games. I pretty much will buy anything Rival Schools merchandise whenever I see it, and this is going to be a very cool piece of the collection to add. This magazine was also in particularly minty condition compared to all the other stuff I saw there, so I think it was destiny that I found this because I did not know that they did a Rival Schools cover. The other thing that was pretty cool about this is this isn't even for the PS1 game. This is actually the arcade game that they were doing the walkthroughs and coverage on. So very early take on the game, and maybe they were expecting it to be Street Fighter level huge, even though it never got to that point. But definitely one of my favorite series. I think this is an awesome looking cover and will display very nicely with my Rival Schools collection. So that is it for the month. Like I said, not really a whole ton of games, but at least I got some other gaming-related things this month. Again, thanks to Tom for hooking me up with the Xbox, and thank you all for watching. Please take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, let me know what you think, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great day or night, wherever you are.